What if everything you thought you knew about the Dark Ages was wrong? The truth is colder, harsher, and more beautiful than the myth. They called it the Dark Ages, an age of ignorance, of silence, of shadow. But what if the darkness was not absence, but concealment? What if beneath the soot of war, plague, and ruin, there burned a quiet brilliance, forgotten lives, hidden truths, and wisdom too wild for the record books? This is not the history you were taught. This is the world that endures behind the myths. A bitter wind howls through the crumbling bones of a once mighty stone chapel, its arches bent like the ribs of a dying beast. Moss creeps along the mortar, and frost settles thick on the altar where no incense has burned in years. The stained glass lies in shards beneath the puistiny fragments of saints' eyes, halos, robes, splintered into silence. Only the creak of timber and the hush of wings disturb the air. A raven flutters from the rafters and disappears into the fog like a prayer that was never answered. She kneels beside a grave, too small for the sorrow it holds. The stone is rough, unmarked, but familiar to her fingers. Her woolen cloak clings to her shoulders, soaked through by dew, and the cold seeps into her bones with the patience of time. Her breath rises in thin clouds, curling toward heaven like whispered confessions. She does not speak aloud. She doesn't need to. The dead understand the silence. They called it the Dark Ages, a time, they said, when minds dimmed and hearts hardened, an age of superstition, ignorance, filth. But the truth is softer and stranger than the myth. The silence was never empty. It was filled with lullabies, sung in forgotten tongues, with the scrape of spoons in earthen bowls, with the quiet rustle of pages turned in candlelight. She reaches into her satchel rough-spun flax, patched and frayed, touches the contents. Gently, a bundle of dried sage, a skein of wool thread, 3 small apples, shriveled by time but still sweet. These are her tools, her offerings, her inheritance. Her fingers rest briefly on the cross around her neck. It is wood, not gold, smoothed not by wealth, but by years of clinging to something she could never quite name. She is not a storybook heroine. No banner has ever borne her name. But she knows how to bind wounds with honey and ash, how to listen to the breathing of sick cattle, how to coax warmth from a near-dead hearth. She knows how to live in a world that does not see her, and she knows how to survive it. The village behind her stirs. A bell tolls slow, deep, final. Once, twice, a third time. Not for feast or wedding, but for death. The whole valley hears it. Birds scatter. Doors creak open. Somewhere a child cries and is hushed. Still, boys play in the mist. They fashion swords from sticks, crowns from straw. One declares himself king, another a knight. They duel with squeals and laughter. Oblivious to the funeral, they interrupt. Their joy is an act of rebellion against the decay around them. And in that defiant laughter, history breathes. They say there was no art in this age, but look closer. In a monastery cell, a monk dips his reed into ink made from soot and wine, copying letters that have survived empires. His fingertips are stained with memory. In a kitchen, a mother traces ancient patterns in dough before baking it, passing on stories in gesture, not word. In a glade, a girl strings flowers into her sister's hair, humming a melody no scribe ever wrote down. And what of Hertha woman, who now walks into the woods alone, with frost in her hem and burden on her back. Her steps do not echo in history books. Her name will not be carved in any stone, but she carries knowledge born of centuries: how to stitch a cloak tight against the cold, how to read the sky for coming storms, how to pray without words. She walks past the edge of the village and into a forest that knows her scent. The trees lean like elders over her path. Crows call overhead. Somewhere, a branch snaps, fox or thief, she cannot tell. She doesn't quicken her pace. Fear has walked beside her too long to be a stranger. Underfoot, the earth is soft with rot. The woods here have grown around the bones of older things, forgotten altars, ruined shrines, rusted swords, half swallowed by moss. She pauses at one such stone, its surface carved with a symbol worn down by wind and rain. Her hand hovers over it. She does not know its meaning, but she feels its weight. There was never one dark age. There were 1,000 overlapping shadows, cast by famine and fear. Yes, but also by candlelight, by the hush of monasteries, by the secrets of women who healed with herbs when no doctor would come. Darkness is not the absence of light. It is the veil that keeps the sacred hidden. She kneels once more, this time at the base of an old oak, and buries one of the apples therein, offering or a promise. Then she stands and turns toward the east, where the sun begins to break through. The trees, thin and pale, but persistent. The wind carries the bell's last echo behind her. Ahead lies silence, but not emptiness. The woods are listening. The past is watching. And as she disappears into the trees, a single raven circles once overhead, then vanishes into the sky. The record books will forget her, but the land will remember. And just beyond the trees, another fire waits to be lit. A crow caws once, sharp and solitary, before flapping away from the bare rafters of a half-collapsed barn. Beneath the bird's shadow, a man kneels in the snow-stained mud, his back hunched, his boots crusted in frost, and his breath fogging, the morning like incense from some forgotten rite. In his gloved hand, a rusted scalpel trembles slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Last night, he bled a man with a fever. He hasn't slept. He rarely does. The leeches in his bucket writhe, desperate for warmth. He mutters to them, names them. Even this one is for drawing poison, that one for balancing the humors. In the hollow rhythm of daily suffering, he has made his tools sacred, not because they are perfect, but because they are all he has. They say these were centuries without medicine, that when illness struck, the ignorant simply knelt and waited to die. But here, in the hush between snowflakes, truth huddles closer to the earth. The dark ages were not silent, they were whispered. Healing was passed mouth to mouth, like folk songs, like spells. A root boiled for 9 breaths, a poultice bound with sheep's wool. This was not ignorance, it was memory carved into flesh. Inside the house, the screams grow louder. A woman labors through the ancient storm of birth. Her eyes are shut. Her mother kneels beside her, not crying, only humming. It's a tune older than the walls, older than the words. It's a lullaby for the unborn. The healer enters, ducking under the low beam where a Virgin Mary icon watches from above, her face faded, lips chipped, but gaze still steady. The room smells of ash, nettle, blood. The man sets down his bucket and removes a bundle of cloth from his coat inside, herbs, a bone needle, beeswax, and a thin vial of something black. He works quietly, gently. He whispers once, "Breathe, girl," and she does. The mother presses a damp rag to her daughter's brow, and the virgin looks on. Then, a cry, first soft then piercing. The room stills. A baby, bloody and furious, enters the world, screaming. It is a sound not of ignorance, but defiance. The healer does not smile, but his shoulders lower. He cuts the cord with his scalpel, ties it with spun flax, and hands the child to the mother, whose eyes fill not with joy, but disbelief. She lived. They both lived. That is miracle enough. He leaves as quietly as he came. Outside, the sky is brightening faintly, though no sun is seen. He kneels again in the snow, washing his hands. The blood blooms like ink in the slush. He wipes them on his apron, then makes the sign of the cross over his chest. Forgets these were not dumb centuries, they were desperate ones. And in desperation, people do not stop knowing. They learn faster. They remember harder. They pass down everything that works, because what works becomes sacred. Books may burn, but hands remember. The healer walks on, past the blacksmith hammering out a horseshoe with fingers missing from frostbite, past a monk crouched beside a dying calf, whispering psalms into the fog, past two children smashing snowballs against a stone wall, their laughter ringing brighter than the best. Medicine in the Dark Ages was not sterile. It was not precise. It was raw, improvised, beautiful. It came from the soil, from the gut, from the grief of mothers and the trial of thousands of failed cures. And sometimes, like today, it worked. A raven circles overhead. In the distance, another scream. Not childbirth. A sickness, maybe. A wound. Or worse, the healer does not flinch. He moves toward the sound. Because in this world of soot and sorrow, someone must still carry the thread between suffering and survival. And those threads, however crude, however quiet, are what stitched the future together. The past does not speak in textbooks. It breathes in cold hands, in mumbled prayers, in half-remembered recipes and midnight rituals. In the Dark Ages, the body was a battlefield, but healing was an act of rebellion. And in the next village, beneath another roof, another child fights for breath. Another widow reaches for sage. Another old man ties leeches to his arm and waits. The war against death never stopped. It only changed weapons. And somewhere between slush and sky, the myth begins to crack. Because truth was never truly lost. It was just hiding, waiting, stitched quietly into a blood-stained apron. And the next chapter of this silent war is about to begin. A single bell tolls through the biting morning air, echoing off frost-dusted stone and the gnarled silhouettes of bare trees. Its iron song stirs the fields below and trembles in the bones of those who rise at its call. High atop the hill, the monastery waits in silence, gray and solemn against the pale sky. Within its walls, time does not pass like in the world below. Here, it drips slowly like wax from a candle, like ink across skin-thin parchment. A boy, barefoot, robed in wool. 2 sizes, 2 large moves, quickly across the frozen cloister. His breath clouds before him, white and fleeting, but the scrolls he carries are firm in his grasp. Twine holds the brittle vellum tight, the knots practiced, reverent. This bundle is not just parchment, it is memory, prayer, defiance, they say. Knowledge died in the dark ages, that the flame of understanding was snuffed out by plague and fear, that the world turned its back on reason and let the silence take root. But they do not know this place. The boy slips into the scriptorium, where candlelight dances over centuries of thought. The chamber smells of oil, damp stone, and ink ground into wood. Monks sit hunched over narrow desks, their spines curved like old roots. They speak no words, none are needed. The scratching of quill on parchment is the only sound, sacred and soft, as if the walls themselves are listening. On each desk lies a small universe. Some script sacred psalms in Latin, their hands steady with devotion. Others transcribe ancient wisdom medicine from Galen, geometry from Pythagoras, the philosophies of a forgotten age. One monk carefully shades the sinews of a drawn arm, naming each bone in 2 tongues. His hand trembles with age, but not with doubt. The boy kneels beside him, placing the scrolls without a word. He watches, eyes wide, as ink pulls across the page like blood through cloth. The letters, the lines, the curves there, not just shapes, their survival. The boy cannot read all the languages yet, but he feels the weight of them. Like the tolling bell, they ring inside his ribs. Outside, in the fields below, the world trudges on. Oxen groan beneath wooden yokes. Mud clings to the feet of men and women who do not know what is being saved above them. To them, the monastery is a distant shape on the hillar place of silence and death. But within these cold walls, something is being kept alive. Something older than kings, more fragile than power. Knowledge. A monk dips his quill again. The candle beside him gutters low, wax pooling in the hollow of a carved rune. He doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. Every letter he copies is a resistance against the darkened act of faith, not just in God, but in the future. The boy stands and moves toward the light filtering through the stone slit of a window. Dust glimmers in its path, hundreds of flecks dancing like ash or falling stars. He reaches his hand into the beam, fingers spread. The warmth is faint, but it is real. There is power in silence, in discipline, in ink. This was not the age of forgetting. It was the age of guardianship, of men who gave up speech so memory could live, of boys who ran barefoot through the cold, not for bread, but for scrolls, of quills wielded like swords against the erosion of time. The midday bell rings. Outside, the fields pause for prayer. Inside, the monks bow their heads, not in surrender, but in silent rebellion. The boy watches them. His robes still too long, his hands still too small, but already he belongs to the fire that never went out. The dark ages were not dark. They were dimly lit sanctuaries where the world's mind flickered in the wind, and yet against every storm refused to die. As the bell fades into silence, a question remains in the air like smoke. What else survived the forgetting hidden, not in books, but in breath, in ritual, in the quiet eyes of those who chose to remember? Somewhere beyond the hills, a rider gallops toward the coast. He carries no sword, only a satchel of sealed pages. And with him, the next chapter begins. The candle flickers as the wind sighs through the cracks in the chapel stone. The knight does not move. His knees press into cold flagstone worn smooth by centuries of prayers, penance, and pain. Shadows cling to the arches above him, long and unmoving, like the ghosts he cannot shake. His breath is shallow, his hands tremble, though not from fear, from the weight of remembering in the silence. Only the candle speaks, a soft crackle, a whisper of fire against wax. The night's lips trace the same prayer over and over, but it is no longer for forgiveness. It is a plea to be forgotten by the memories that haunt him. Blood dries on the collar of his tunic. It was warm when spilled. Now it clings to him like guilt. He remembers the boy's eyes, wide, not with hate, but confusion. The child had raised no sword, only a stick, barely old enough to wield fear. But war does not wait for questions. The sword had sung before. His heart could speak. And when silence fell again, it fell forever for that child. And now it sings only in dreams. The night reaches for his sword, not to wield it, but to touch it, as if its cold steel might tether him to the world that still moves outside these walls. A world where people trade fish and cloth, where children chase goats, where laughter exists, where he is no longer welcome. He does not belong to the noise of mourning. He belongs to the stillness that comes after the torch goes out, after the scream dies, after the killing stops. He has seen enough fields turned crimson. He has heard too many men cry for their mothers as they bled. He knows now bravery and cruelty are neighbors. They called the Dark Ages a time of mindless violence, of barbarians and brutes. But they forget the cost borne in silence. Not all wounds bleed. Some only whisper in dreams, in chapel corners, in the rusted joints of armor set aside in shame. The relic around his neck brushes his chest as he bows deeper. A tiny, brittle scrap of parchment pressed with the bone dust of a saint, and beside it, a curl of golden hair. His daughters, the only thing left in the world that makes him believe in light. She is far now, far from his war, far from his sins, every coin he's earned, every sin he's buried, every prayer he's muttered through clenched teeth, all for her, to buy her peace, to protect her from the man her father became. He wonders if she remembers his face outside the chapel. Bell tolls, soft, distant, calling the village to market. The forge begins to sing. Hooves echo down the muddy lane. Life stirs, uncaring. The world moves forward even when souls cannot. The night rises slowly, his knees groan, his back stiff. He straps the sword to his side, not because he wants to wield it again, but because he must. Mercy is a beautiful thing, but in this world, it can get a man killed, and there are still debts to pay, still fires to face, still ghosts to earn. As he steps outside, the sun breaks over the chapel roof, catching the edge of his blade. It gleams, not with glory, but with warning. A reminder, light and shadow walk the same road. He walks past the bakery, where warm bread fills the air, past a woman folding linen with cracked red hands, past a man with one eye selling onions from a barrow. They do not see a knight, they see a man draped in silence, and he does not meet their eyes. He passes the town gates, where children play, with sticks pretending to be warriors. One of them stabs the other and laughs. The other falls dramatically, arms wide, tongue out. The knight flinches. He keeps walking. They say the Dark Ages were ruled by monsters, kings who burned cities, knights who killed for pleasure, peasants who knew only dirt and disease. But the truth is quieter and more brutal. The men who survived were not soulless, they were simply scarred. And in that silence, in those stone chapels, something human endured. A flicker of conscience, a trembling flame that refused to die. The knight does not know if he is good. He only knows he is still walking, and in a village not far. On the other side of the mountains, a little girl places flowers at the foot of a wooden cross. She does not know where her father is, but she prays for him anyway. The light touches the chapel again as the candle finally gutters out, and the world moves on, one burden heavier. The stone grinds slowly beneath her palm, its surface cold and unforgiving. Each turn sends a puff of barley dust into the air, catching the faint light that leaks through the slats of the wooden walls. Her fingers are cracked and red, stiff from days of snow melt and smoke. The frayed ribbon in her hair was once bright, now dulled, like everything in this season of hunger and hush. Outside, the forest presses in bare branches, scratching at the sky like bones, reaching for warmth. Inside, the stew bubbles in a soot-blackened pot, its thin scent filling the room with hope more than nourishment. Onion, turnip, a brittle bone, boiled for the third time. She does not sigh, she hums. The tune is ancient, passed from woman to woman long before her mother's mother. It has no words, it needs none. They say the Dark Ages were silent for women, that they labored, birthed, and died, unnoticed, without power, without voice. But listen closely. Her song fills the silence. It lives in the steam rising from the pot. In the thread she knots to mend her brother's cloak. In the whisper she murmurs over her sister's fevered brow. She knows what no priest will. Write in ink. She knows that fevered sweat smells sweet before death, that goats weep when they die, that a girl's bleeding comes like clockwork with the moon, and pain, if it does not crush you, teaches you to read the language of the body like scripture. She knows the bark that dulls pain, the root that brings sleep, the leaf that kills tonight. She will walk a frozen path through the woods, her basket slung low, fingers clenched around a wrapped cloth and fire-touched oil. The midwife is old now, her back curls like a question mark. Another woman labors in the dark, her breath ragged, her body torn open by life's cruel miracle. The girl will not speak, she will act. She will hold the trembling legs, wipe the brow, catch the life that screams into being. She will not flinch when blood splashes her skirts. She will not weep when the mother does not wake. And when she returns cloaked in steam and shadow, the fire will have gone low. She stir it with care and kneel once more by the stone. Grind, turn, breathe. No scroll records her name. No bard sings her story. Yet entire lineages owe their existence to the steadiness of her hands. Kings ruled for a decade. She kept her family alive for 50 winters. There is no glory here, no gold, only survival, only the weight of days and the muscle memory of mercy. Snow begins to fall, slow and thick, blanketing the trees outside in pale silence. She sets the stone aside, walks to the crooked wooden door, and opens it wide. The wind bites, but she doesn't flinch. She closes her eyes, lets the cold settle on her lashes like ash. For one moment, all is still. The forest holds its breath. The world forgets itself. Then the pop of firewood. A goat bleats. Somewhere far off, A newborn's cry shatters the hush. The girl smiles, just faintly, and steps back into the dark. History calls it the Dark Ages, but in truth, it was kept lit by women like her, burning quietly, unseen, uncelebrated, unyielding. And as the snow deepens and the wind carries her song beyond the tree line, another chapter begins to stir, where the silence of the hearth meets the clash of iron, where unseen hands give way to those bloodied in battle. The story is not yet done. The next soul waits in shadow. A crow lands on the crossbeam of a crumbling gate. Its call breaks the stillness. Below, smoke curls from the thatched roof of a stone cottage nestled in frost-bitten soil. The air is sharp with wood smoke, and the garden lies hushed beneath a coat of rime. One man kneels in the frozen earth, pulling stubby carrots from a soil more stubborn than generous. His hands, cracked and raw, move with the confidence of someone who has never known a world of plenty. Each tug of the earth is prayer and ritual, carved into muscle over winters too long to count. His tunic, thick with patches, clings to his frame like bark to a tree course, brown, enduring. On the gatepost, a wooden figure of St. Cuthbert leans to one side, weathered by rain, kissed by centuries of whispered hopes, but the shape remains. They called this time a collapse, a fall from brilliance, a dark echo after Rome's marble thunder. But in truth it was not silence that followed the empire's song. It was adaptation, resilience in new form, a whisper through the ruins. This man, nameless in history, knows more than conquest and law. He knows the language of the soil, how to coax pitch from pine and bend green willow into the shape of baskets. He has no parchment, no ink, but he has knowledge passed from mouth to hand, from fire pit to furrow. He can find clean water in a dry winter. He can roof a house without a single nail. Inside the cottage, his daughter sits on a stool fashioned from a tree stump, her finger tracing crooked Latin across a worn psalter, gifted by a monk long gone. She speaks the sacred syllables slowly, reverently, her tongue unfamiliar with their shape, but drawn to their rhythm. The candle beside her flickers, fed by tallow scraped from slaughter. Its flame dances across stone walls, scratched with marks, measurements, symbols, perhaps even dreams. The fire crackles low. Beyond the thick wooden door, the cold deepens. But inside, there is warmth. Stories are whispered over roots, and soup of saints who bled light, of beasts with golden eyes, of battles fought by men whose names now echo in frost. The girl speaks of Constantine and dragons in the same breath, and no one corrects her, because here, truth is not what matters. Most continuity is dot in Rome. Roads were law, precision, power, but out here, beneath rotting bridges and cracked mile markers, they are memory ghosts of granite swallowed by moss. The man finishes his digging and rises slowly. He wipes dirt on his knees, then walks to the path where stone peeks through soil like bone through skin. He crouches and places a calloused fingertip on an ancient carving, a Roman letter, worn, meaningless to him now. But once it commanded legions. Once it bore the feet of empires. Now it marks the edge of his world. And yet that world still turns. This is not decline. This is transformation. The bards of empire never sang of men like him. They did not write of a daughter reading by candlelight, or of soil that remembers every toe-print. But here, beneath every so-called ruin is life, quiet, feral, enduring. The cottage's timber groans in the wind. He steps inside, closes the door, and bars it with a branch smoothed by years of use. His daughter looks up, smiles. The psalter closes with a sigh. In the darkness outside, stars pierce the sky, each one a pinprick of ancient memory. He knows them all by name, not from books, but from shepherds and fathers, from nights spent lying on wet grass with eyes toward heaven. Their names are spoken softly, like prayer or prophecy. The world says Rome fell, that light was lost, but light still flickers in hearths, in minds, in hands that carry not swords, but flame. A pot hisses on the hearthstone. The girl stirs it with a carved stick. They eat in silence, the way people do when silence means safety. And when the meal is done, the man walks to the corner of the cottage and opens a wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lies a small figure carved from you. A relic older than he is, older, perhaps, than even the stone outside. He holds it in his palm and closes his eyes, not in worship, in remembrance. Outside, the Roman road stretches into fog further than he will ever walk, but his life, lived here in the aftershadow of empires, matters no less. The Dark Ages did not snuff out civilization. They buried it beneath barley and birch. They whispered it forward in stories, in seeds, in souls too stubborn to vanish. And as the candle burns low, and the frost climbs the window glass, a question hangs in the quiet. What else survived, unspoken? What knowledge lies not in ink, but in instinct, not erased, just hidden? The fire pops. A wind moves through the trees, and from a far hill, a bell tolls faint, forgotten, but still ringing. The ember glows, and the story continues. The storm drums on the chapel roof like an ancient call to war. Wind hurls itself at the narrow windows, rattling their leaded glass with fury, as if trying to claw its way inside. The stone walls stand firm. Inside there is warmth, not sun or summer, but of fire, of presence, of story. A taper is lit, flame against darkness, a single defiance against the void. The old woman's hand shakes, but her eyes do not. They've seen more winters than most in the village, watched the land rot and bloom again, heard the chants of monks and the sobs of mothers echo through the hills. She does not fear the dark. She speaks through it. The children sit wrapped in damp cloaks, the wool heavy with rain and the silence of waiting. Their fathers are gonsome at the flooded mill. Others, perhaps still not returned from the forest paths. Their mothers are tending goats or chickens, or simply praying the roof holds tart. Here, beneath the watchful gaze of a crude wooden Christ, the old woman begins, not with a name or a date, but with a raven, a great black raven who watched over a holy bell whose cry could turn away lightning and sickness. The children lean in not because they believe, but because they want to. Her voice is cracked like frost-bitten earth, but it holds the room. She speaks of a bridge built from moss and bone by angels too weary to fly, of a king who threw away his crown to hear one shepherd's melody in the fog. She tells of grief that took the form of wolves, of saints who walked barefoot into fire and came out singing. No parchment bears these tales. No scribe in a distant monastery has copied them in gold, but they live threaded through the marrow of villages like this one, through voices like hers. A boy draws closer. He doesn't understand every word, but the rhythm of her speech is older than language. It lives in the pulse, in the fire's breath. His sister clutches his hand, not out of fear, but to feel something solid, something warm, something alive. This, then, is the truth they never wrote down. They said the Dark Ages were a time of silence, but that is only because they did not hear the voices in the rain. They said no one read, but they didn't kneel beside the girl at the back of the chapel, her lips moving with the rhythm of psalms taught not by books, but by memory passed from her mother's mouth, from her grandmother's dreams. The world outside is drenched, trees groan under the weight of water. Mud swallows the footprints of those long gone, but inside this chapel, time is not lost, it is folded, layered. The past sits beside the present, like shadows beside candlelight. She continues, a child born, with a veil over his face, a dog that refused to leave a grave, a field that grew no crops until a widow sang to it each morning. These are not history, they will say, but what else is history, if not the stories we return to when we are wet, hungry, and afraid? The flame trembles, the wind screams. Then, for a moment, all falls still. One girl, barely more than 5, has drifted to sleep. Her little hand still holds the cross carved by her father. The woman sees her and smiles, a quiet, aching thing. There is no glory in her face, only endurance. The rain softens, becomes a hush. The chapel breathes. The wood of the pews creaks, like old bones settling somewhere outside. A sheep bleats, distant and half drowned in the wind. Life continues. She does not stop. The stories stretch beyond her, behind her. Through her, she is not their author, only their vessel. And when her time ends, one of these children will carry them forward, perhaps to a child of their own. On a night not unlike this one, because in the so-called Dark Ages, it was not scrolls that held civilization together. It was hands, voices, memory. It was grandmothers like her who lit candles against the black and spoke the world back into shape. A time without knowledge. No, a time without power, perhaps. A time without peace, but never without wisdom. The rain ceases, like a breath held and then released. The thatch above still drips in soft rhythm, the beat of a world that refuses to die. The old woman pauses, not to find her place, she never lost it, but to let the silence speak for her. In that silence, the children sit not in fear, but in awe. They have heard something more than story. They have touched something ancient. She begins again, her voice lower now, almost a chant. There was a place, and a boy who heard them and answered, and in doing so, saved a village from burning. The boy in the front clutches his knees. He wants to be that boy. Outside, morning glows behind the clouds. Not yet full light, but enough to show that the path to the village is no longer a river. Enough to mean their mothers will come soon. The fathers, too. But they do not rise, because something sacred has passed between them. Not written, not taught, not commanded, only given. The old woman closes her eyes, not in sleep, but in reverence. There was never a time without knowledge, only times when knowledge was not written in books. There was never a world without memory. Only worlds where memory chose a quieter voice. And so, as the candle flickers and the wind forgets its rage, we move forward, not to kings or battles, not to palaces or priests, but to the next keeper of memory, the next voice in the storm. And so the storm passed, not with triumph, but with quiet, not with banners, but with breath in. A world history calls dark. It was not the crowns or the swords that kept the flame alive, but voices like hers, wrinkled hands, lighting tapers, telling truths wrapped in wonder, planting memory like seeds in young hearts. The dark ages were not silent. They were whispered through stone walls, sung through frost-bitten lips, etched into the soul, not parchment hand. Tonight, through story, we remember what they could not erase. This is not the end of the tale. It is only the next ember in a fire that never died. If these voices still echo in you, stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more truths buried in the ash of forgotten time. Subscribe, return. Remember, the past is not lost. It is only waiting to be heard again.